Good morning, friends and enemies. Today we're going to be kicking off a ranking series, all right? We're going position by position, starting with the wide receivers, top 36 of them for the 2025 fantasy football season. I've spent the last few days just revamping the graphics, the images, the tiers, everything to make this shit nicey for y'all, all right? Wide receivers, top 36, tiered up, tiered down, cheeked up. Let's get it. I want to be very clear about these tiers and how I'm ranking throughout the summer. Tiers are just that. They are guys that I feel exactly the same about. Let's start at the very top. With tier 1, we're just going to call this tier the GOATs, all right? It's plain, it's simple, it's the GOATs of fantasy football. It's Ja'Marr Chase, it's CeeDee Lamb, it's Jefferson. Ja'Marr Chase is coming off of an all-time season. Obviously, I don't think Cincinnati's defense is getting any better. In fact, it might get worse if Trey Hendrickson walks out the door, though. So I don't know that anything changes for Ja'Marr Chase. And if nothing changes, then you want Ja'Marr Chase ranked very, very highly in fantasy football this year. Justin Jefferson, I think there is some uncertainty at quarterback. That strikes again. Sam Darnold last year, J.J. McCarthy now taking over. But Justin Jefferson's pretty much a bulletproof, like 1,610 touchdowns if he stays healthy with immense upside, obviously. And then you got CeeDee Lamb. I mean, I'm easily buying the dip on this 25-year-old coming off of a down year. If you look at the last year that him and Dak played together, I mean, we're talking about 135 catches, 1,850 total yards, and 14 touchdowns. Now, they did just add George Pickens. To me, like, listen, if they didn't have George Pickens, I would say CeeDee Lamb is the odds-on favorite to lead the NFL in targets, probably receiving yards and receptions. So, yes, it might bring him down from almost being the dark horse favorite, if that makes sense, to be the wide receiver 1 overall in fantasy, to just being in this tier with the other GOATs, all right? So George Pickens, I think, takes him down from that, like, almost guaranteed wide receiver 1 ceiling, if it was just him and Dak in Dallas, to just being a top 3 fantasy wide receiver. We'll move on to tier 2, and this is like the tier where I'm feeling nicey if this guy is my wide receiver 1. And I want to be very specific about these tiers. I know I see it all over the place in fantasy. I see people doing ranking videos. I see people doing tiers. When I'm doing tiers, and this is how I'm going to explain this for the rest of the summer, and this is how I'm going to explain rankings in general. If a guy is in a similar tier with another guy, if a guy is in the same tier as another guy, I don't have one ranked above the other one. They feel exactly the same to me. So when I list off these next 6 players in this tier of feeling nicey as my wide receiver 1, it's Amon-Ra St. Brown, it's Puka, it's Nico, it's Malik Neighbors, it's Drake London, and it is Brian Thomas Jr. These are guys, again, that if they are my wide receiver 1 on my fantasy team, I'm feeling great about. So it's not a preference of one or the other. It's more of the overall strategy of when you're drafting a player, you could listen to what the tiers mean and then build the structure of your team that way. So we jump into tier number 2, and that is the guys that I'm feeling real fucking good about if I have as my wide receiver 1. So again, I don't prefer Puka to Malik Neighbors. I prefer having one of these guys as my wide receiver 1. Whoever you prefer, great. If I have a preference of one guy over another, that will show via my tiers. So when you look at Puka, you're taking Cooper Kupp out of the picture. You're putting Devontae Adams in the picture. I think Puka is clearly going to be the alpha there, regardless, him just being in the prime of his career. I would say the only concern I have about him is his red zone involvement's been a little bit questionable. He's only scored 9 touchdowns through 2 seasons, despite having an insane, number of targets and receptions. Kyron scores a ton of touchdowns. Adams is going to be an elite option in the red zone. I would say Puka probably gets a major bump in full PPR. Plus, touchdown projections are kind of fluky year over year. So if he ends up having 13 this year, no one's going to be surprised. So I'm not going to overly, pick and pry about Puka here, but he's an elite player. Same thing with Nico Collins. He's going to have an elite target share. He has high value targets coming his way. He's a downfield playmaker. He's a possession guy. They brought in Jalen Noel, Christian Kirk, and Jaden Higgins, all really, really solid wide receivers. If anything, I just think that elevates the actual passing game there in Houston. So Nico is about as good of a receiver as you're going to find in the NFL. Next up, we got Amon-Ra St. Brown. I mean, we're talking about back-to-back PPR wide receiver 3 finishes. He has as high of a floor as you're going to find in fantasy football. Detroit, I think coming off of last year, Detroit's going to have a fire lit under their asses, just the way that the season ended. I will say, if you want to grab something to hold against Amon-Ra St. Brown in this offense, it's obviously the loss of Ben Johnson going to Chicago. But I'll cover this a little bit more in the tight end video. I actually think the biggest loss when it comes to Ben Johnson, or the biggest impact, will be on Sam Laporta. I'm on Ross St. Brown. I have no qualms about it. Ben Johnson being lost there, I don't think affects Amon-Ra. Next up, we got Malik Neighbors. Malik's talent is up there with anybody in the NFL. I think because he's only in his second season, that hasn't fully shown itself. But in a year, probably by the end of this season, at the latest by the end of next season, he will be as talented as Justin Jefferson. He will be as talented as Jamar Chase. He will be as talented as CeeDee Lamb. I think that's very obvious when you just watch football and watch him play. I just don't want to miss his true breakout season. That's what happens, right? Rookies have really good seasons. He had an incredible season last year, and then they take that second year jump, and then you're like, fuck, I missed out on that 1,700-yard season. He's going to get better quarterback play from Russ and maybe Jackson Dart towards the end of the year there. So, talk about a guy who's got a little bit of quarterback play improvement here, a little bit of overall team improvement here. I just love Malik Neighbors as a talent, and if he's my wide receiver one, I'm feeling nicey. Then you got his former teammate and another breakout rookie superstar last year, 87 for 1,282 yards, 10 touchdowns. Christian Kirk is gone. Gabe Davis is gone. Evan Ingram is gone. Liam Cohen is in. Travis Hunter's obviously in too, but I just think this offense is now set up with better coaches, a better system, and just more continuity going into year two. Brian Thomas Jr. is a superstar in the making, as is Drake London, still just 23 years old, coming off of his major breakout year. I mean, you look at the 3 games that Michael Penix started for the Falcons last year, and Drake London had 39 targets in those 3 games. Carry that shit over in 2025, about to be a movie in Atlanta. So we move off of tier 2. Would be happy to have any of those guys as my wide receiver 1. We move into tier 3. This is a little bit of a smaller tier. This is guys I'm looking at, I think are a coin flip for getting into the wide receiver 1 role, but they're high-end wide receiver 2s at worst. I don't think it's risky to build your team around them as your wide receiver 1, but I will say you could end up being a bit disappointed if you don't hit at the other position. So they're safe players, but you do have to have that high-end talent in another spot, whether it's like Josh Allen at quarterback, Saquon at running back, or whatever the case may be. These guys, borderline wide receiver 1, 2s. We have Ladd McConkey, A.J. Brown, Terry McLaurin, and T. Higgins. Same case for T. Higgins. The Bengals are running back what they had last year. Bad defense. We saw T. Higgins explode. Jamar Chase, Joe Burrow. It's going to be, another 4,800 passing yard season for Burrow. T. Higgins is going to be a monster there. Ladd McConkey. I mean, you look at week 8 through the end of the regular season, he was the PPR wide receiver 8. That does not include the 197-yard playoff game. Wide receiver 8 in PPR from week 8 to the end of the season. There is no ceiling for what he could do in the second year of this Chargers offense. And then you have A.J. Brown. I mean, it feels weird to put A.J. Brown into tier 3, but when you just take a step back and objectively look at Philly, Saquon coming in became what their offense was. The rushing volume hurts the Eagles' passing game. I think it was very clear. Anyone who had Jalen Hurts last year, anyone who had A.J. Brown, anyone who had Devontae Smith, anyone who had Dallas Goedert, any of those guys, it was very clear on a week-to-week basis that this team's passing offense just did not exist at the level it did a couple of years ago because their offense runs through Saquon Barkley getting 25 touches a game. And then you pile on the fact that they now have an elite defense. They just don't need to take as many shots down the field. So it's like A.J. Brown will have his elite weeks, but I think at the end of the year, like just based on the pass volume that they're not going to have there, he's more of a borderline wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2. And I put Terry McLaurin in the same tier. I think he's really flirting with the tier 2, tier 3 kind of borderline there, but I put him in 3 here. He's a clear alpha with a very, very real quarterback. Obviously, they did add Debo to the offense, which I think will be a cool little addition for them. They're going to be able to use him around the line of scrimmage. I will say I think it's just as likely as the Debo addition kind of goes sour as it does look really, really good a year from now. But overall, Terry, I think you could easily make the case for Terry to be in that tier 2, but I'm going to leave him in tier 3 for right now. We move on to tier 4. This is another 4-player tier. This is the tier that I would say would love these guys as my wide receiver 2, but I would be nervous if they were the top dog at that position for me, for my team going into 2025. So you look at tier 3, and I'm saying like, I don't necessarily expect wide receiver 1 numbers, but I would still feel relatively secure about them being the top dog on my team at the position. This is the tier where I'm looking at it and I'm saying to myself, I'm going to be nervous if these are the guys that really top the list for me. So we're looking at Garrett Wilson, Tyreek Hill, Mike Evans, and Jackson Smith-Njigba. JSN, you look at what's going on in Seattle there. Geno's out. DK Metcalf is out. Tyler Lockett is out. You have Sam Darnold coming in, Cooper Kupp coming in, Clint Kubiak coming in. It's a lot of moving parts. He had a major breakout sophomore season, obviously. He's a super, super high floor PPR player. I just am not sure how they're going to use him this year. I'm just not sure how him and Cooper Kupp coexist on the offense. I know JSN will be the number one guy there. I just don't know if I trust Sam Darnold to run like a high volume, efficient offense that's not one like it was in Minnesota with all the weapons and the offensive line play and the system, one where he's not seeing pressure all the time. I mean, Seattle has a very, very bad offensive line. I mean, they did upgrade it a little bit this offseason, so I think we'll see improvements, but I still get nervous about what this offense will be. JSN should see a ton of targets, but overall, love him as a wide receiver 2 on your team if you can get him there. If he is your wide receiver 1, I'm going to be a little bit nervous. We talk about Mike Evans, 1,000 yards, incoming, always incoming, but improved target competition for sure. Like Chris Godwin is expected to be playing this year, McMillan in year 2, and then obviously they used a first-round pick on Emeka Egbuka to really shore up that wide receiver position there in Tampa Bay. But, you know, I really, really like the Tampa Bay passing offense. And then, like, if you owned Mike Evans last year, like, you felt good about it. Like, week in and week out, like, yeah, every once in a while he had a wide receiver 3 week. But for the most part, you were like, he is an incredibly solid fantasy asset for me. There isn't much that I saw last year that made me feel like he was slowing down. So still feel great about Evans as my 2. Garrett Wilson, I think he's in like a Terry McLaurin situation where he's just a star player, separator, route runner, hands, all the above, just trapped with a shitty quarterback. I get it. Justin Fields is coming in, and we're going to do the same thing. This is the best quarterback he's played with, et cetera, whatever. And Justin Fields, I think I was one of the first people to point out this offseason that you know, the Fields-DJ Moore connection led to DJ Moore having like 1,300 yards and a ton of targets and all that stuff. And that could definitely happen again in New York with Garrett Wilson and Justin Fields. I don't know. I just look at the Jets offense. I think they're going to be extremely run heavy with Justin Fields, with the 3 running backs that they like to use there. So I'm definitely not leaving Garrett Wilson for dead because of what DJ Moore did with Fields back in 2023. 96, 1375, 9 touchdowns. If that number goes from 9 touchdowns to like 6 touchdowns, which I don't think is crazy, we're looking at, again, a high-end wide receiver 2. If Wilson's my 1, I'm not going to feel great about my team. And that's with Tyreek Hill here, too. Like, there's a lot of moving parts going on with Tyreek Hill here. So these rankings are going to shift tremendously throughout the summer, obviously. With Tyreek Hill, I mean, there's like the trade speculations. There's the off-the-field situation going on. There's Miami's lack of passing success last year because the teams were playing cover 2 at such an insanely high rate, and they couldn't take deep shots down the field. You had the wrist injury. I mean, you have a 31-year-old aged guy right now. So it's like there's a lot of bad stuff going on for Tyreek Hill right now. I think he's probably more likely to move down in my rankings than he is up. But I will say, if everything is just a clean bill of health, if everything is a clean summer and they go into Miami's 2025 season like it was last year, 2 years ago, I'll feel okay about him as my wide receiver 2, despite the absolute disgusting year last year. Move on to tier 5, and these are when the tiers start to expand. They're getting bigger. We got fucking balloons happening here, and this is the tier 5 are guys that are top 24 guys for me, but I'm not expecting wide receiver 1 numbers. 1 or 2 of these guys could end up being a top 12 guy just because that's just how fantasy football works for the most part. But if you ask me about any of the tiers above this, I'm like, yeah, these are strong wide receiver 2s. Wouldn't surprise me at all if they become wide receiver 1s this year. This tier is more guys that I'm targeting as my wide receiver 2. If you can get them as your wide receiver 3, great. All right, so we've got a list of 8 guys in this tier. We've got Courtland Sutton, who is an alpha on an ascending offense, very little target competition. They added Evan Ingram. They drafted Pat Bryant, who's a 3rd-round pick. But that's really it. So I think Courtland Sutton could replicate what he did last year. You have Chris Godwin, dislocated ankle in week 7, okay? But you do start to have to ask yourself, like, he should be back from the dislocated ankle, but you're a 29-year-old receiver that has now started to compile a lot of very serious injuries on your resume, and you just start to slow down at some point. Like, you think about Cooper Kupp, and the fall-off happens quickly. They have a new offense coordinator again, so they're going to have to like redo the offense again. And you draft the 1st-round pick with Emeka Egbuka. Like, I do expect Chris Godwin to obviously play this year, but I think you start to factor in all of those things, the fall off, the target competition, the injuries happening, the new OC, And I'm looking at him as more as a top 24 guy, because that's really what he's been throughout his entire career. I know it's very easy to look at the first 6 weeks of just last year and be like, that's what Chris Godwin's always been. It's like, that's not true at all. You can take the sample size of the 6 years prior, or you can look at like the 1 6-week sample size of what we remember most recently. I think it'd be way more intelligent to look at the sample size we've always had. Now you added another first-round wide receiver. Now you added another serious injury. And to me, he's more of a top 24 guy than he is a top 12 guy. You have Devonta Smith up in this tier as well. Similar to A.J. Brown, we saw Smith's upside kind of just evaporate where the identity of this offense goes through Saquon and an elite defense. I'm going to throw Marvin Harrison Jr. up in this tier. I don't even know if he deserves to be here, but listen, I'm going to buy the dip on the absolute misused prodigy here. I still think he's basically just as good as what he was praised to be coming out of college. I think they misused him a lot last year, and I think he's going to take a big step up in year 2. So MHA is not a guy that I want to be fading this year. We have another hot start guy last year, Rashee Rice. He was one of my favorite draft picks last year. A lot of you guys got to experience the Rashee Rice show in the first few weeks, and then he comes out and has that season-ending injury in week 4. The reports so far are that he's, ramping up well. He's expected to be ready for week 1. We're so far out that I don't really care that beat reporters say he looks good in shorts on a football field right now. The legal situation is still something up in the air. From what I've read, it's not actually a huge concern right now. That process is moving extremely slowly, and I think there's just as good of a chance that it's just pushed aside until the following season or the following offseason or whatever than it is something that actually affects him this year. So you do have these question marks of, this is a very, very serious injury for Rashee Rice, and it's a tricky injury to project what his timeline is going to be. So the teams are always going to come out and say, oh, he's going to be ready for week 1. He's going to be ready for training camp. He's going to be ready for preseason, all that shit. But when push comes to shove and you got to get on the fucking field and perform like you did, we don't know. So I think you have to factor that in. If you're doing like best ball drafts right now, you can draft Rashee Rice in tier 2 or tier 3, but I think you're leaving a lot of risk on the table there. So for me, again, top 24 guy right now. Xavier Worthy had a little bit of a breakout. They did re-sign Hollywood Brown. They drafted Jalen Royals. So I don't see like crazy target share competition here. I think Rice would be a beast if he is healthy, but I am usually one to be a little bit more pessimistic about injuries, and I think putting him as a top 24 guy rather than what he started last year off of, again, just a 3-week sample size, is me being pessimistic and probably the right thing to do when you weigh all the risk and everything involved. Next up, we got DJ Moore, and the Bears wide receiver group was a really tough one to decipher, especially coming out of the NFL draft when they added a bunch of dudes. We are hoping for a lot in Chicago, right? We are hoping for an incredibly improved offense, which on paper, 1,000% should be the case. You bring in Ben Johnson to run the offense. You shore up the entire interior of your offensive line, bringing in Joe Thuney and Drew Dahlman and Jonah Jackson, like really, really flipping that fucking thing around 180 degrees. And everybody's expecting this huge Rome Odunze breakout, but DJ Moore still led the team in targets last year. They added Luther Burden. They added Colston Loveland with early, both top 40 draft capital. Colston Loveland, obviously top 10 draft capital. The target competition is elite. And when I say elite, I don't mean in a good way. I mean, it's the toughest target competition likely in the entire NFL. And that is saying that while we don't even know how good this offense is really going to be. This isn't Caleb has not proven himself as an NFL quarterback. We don't know what this offense is going to hold up as with all these new moving parts. Sometimes it takes a minute to get succinct. Sometimes it takes a minute for a brand new offensive coordinator and a new scheme and a new quarterback and new weapons to get on the same page. So again, when you factor all that in, DJ Moore is a guy for me that think he's a top 24 guy, but to be honest, if you wanted to rank him in the tier below where he's way more of a fringe dude, I wouldn't have a problem with that either because of the uncertainty of what's going on in Chicago. Next up, we got Jerry Jeudy. Similar to last year, I think Judy's production is completely predicated on the ebb and flow of who's at quarterback, right? Jeudy was fine, and then Tillman got hurt, and then Jameis Winston took over, and then Jeudy had an explosive second half of the year because Jameis Winston was averaging, 42 pass attempts per game. That being said, Joe Flacco is the probable starter going into the year for Cleveland. And I think if Joe Flacco is the quarterback, we're probably going to see a really high volume passing attack like we saw with Joe Flacco a couple of years ago, like we saw with him in Indy last year. If that's the case, then Jeudy is probably going to get a shitload of targets. But the problem is Joe Flacco the long-term future? No. And they drafted two guys in the draft this year. They drafted Dylan Gabriel. They got Kenny Pickett. They drafted Shedeur Sanders. So if I had to bet on like who's finishing the season as a quarterback, I don't know which one, but I would be shocked if it's Joe Flacco for 17 games. And as soon as another quarterback takes over, where that offense probably dips in passing volume, that's not going to be good for Jerry Jeudy or any of the passing weapons out there in Cleveland. And the last dude in this tier, and again, like I cannot emphasize this enough, just because I'm saying Davante Adams last tier does not mean he's my 25th ranked wide receiver. He is in this fifth tier, which again, you could put all the way up at wide receiver 17 if you want. Again, it's your preference of these guys. They all feel the same to me, meaning if you showed me a lineup where this guy was your wide receiver 2 versus this guy, or this guy was your wide receiver 3 versus this guy, and they were in the same tier, I would feel the same way about that team. That's the best way I could probably explain that. Davante Adams, he's aging. He ain't getting any younger. He's in a new offense, but I'm not sold whatsoever that he's lost a major step. I thought he looked really good in New York last year, despite him and Aaron Rodgers being completely out of sync outside of a couple games. This Rams offense should be fun. It is hard to imagine how he would top Puka at this point in his career in the pecking order. But Davante Adams does feel like a guy who would kind of fit in flawlessly with a veteran like Matt Stafford, flawlessly in a Sean McVay type of offense. So I still think I feel pretty good about him being a top 24 guy, and maybe surprising if he can come down with 10, 12 touchdowns this year. And to wrap the top 36 wide receivers, we still got a lot of them, but these guys are all in the same tier for me. We have 11 dudes in tier number 6, and tier number 6 for me are fringe wide receiver 2, 3s. They are guys that I feel a lot more comfortable as my wide receiver 3, and I think you can draft them as your wide receiver 3s, but they are fringe wide receiver 2s, and I'm going to feel a little bit nervous if they are the 2 for me in my lineups. So we'll start it off with Chris Olave. He's a 1,000-yard receiver if healthy, but you do have the concussion concerns. You do have Tyler Shuck likely becoming the starter here, so the passing game could be atrocious. They do not have Clint Kubiak anymore, which I don't even know if that's a positive or a negative at this point based on how last year played out. But it's a messy situation with concussion concerns. So, Olave, really good player, still up in the air about, what we can expect from him in fantasy this year. I got DK Metcalf in this tier as well. He's going to be basically the sole target earner out there in Pittsburgh now that George Pickens is gone. But I still look at the offense and, Aaron Rodgers might come in, but even if Aaron Rodgers comes in, I don't see it being that different from what the Jets offense was last year. At the end of the day, it's Arthur Smith's offense, and they're going to be an extremely low volume passing offense. And you've seen what Arthur Smith has done in terms of capping statistically what an elite receiver can do. I mean, you look at A.J. Brown, you look at Drake London, you look at George Pickens, and when Arthur Smith is their OC, there's just no volume to be had. There's no upside to be had in fantasy. And I think even if you consider DK Metcalf in that AJB, Drake London tier, it's what are we really expecting production-wise in an Arthur Smith offense? So I like the opportunity in terms of target share, but at the end of the day, I'm looking him as far more of a fringe wide receiver 2, 3 in my tiers. Next up, we got Jameson Williams. Had his breakout year last year. I just think he's a boomer bust on a week-to-week basis, high upside, 1,000-yard receiver in a great offense. Staying in that division, we have Rome Odunze. Again, you have to love Ben Johnson. You have to love the O-line additions. Drafting Luther Burden, drafting Colson Loveland. I mean, you could fake your way into talking about how Rome had a good rookie year, but at the end of the day, no, he didn't. People were talking about Rome Odunze in the same tier as Malik Neighbors. There's a lot of people drafting Rome Odunze over Malik Neighbors, and that looks silly as fuck now. And I don't want to hear excuses because Malik Neighbors was working with probably the worst quarterback group in the NFL last year. So the fact of the matter is this: I like Rome Odunze a lot, and I'm going to be drafting him where I can at this price. But I'm not drafting him with the expectation of getting wide receiver 12 overall production. I'm not drafting Rome as if this breakout is 1,000% coming. He didn't play well last year. He had very little production. Now you add in Luther Burden and Colson Loveland to the target share room. You still have DJ Moore, who out-targeted him last year. We don't know how good of a quarterback Caleb Williams is actually going to be at the NFL level, and I think there's pause for concerns. It's very lazy analysis to just say Rome's going to have a big breakout. But when you start to break it down in tiers, and I tell you that, for me, he's a fringe wide receiver 3-2 guy, you start to build your team around that emphasis. You start to say, okay, if I'm building a team based on Nick's tiers, I'm looking at Rome as that wide receiver 3 on my team, not as the wide receiver 2 that everybody's just saying, oh, breakout year incoming. Very good player, but that doesn't always translate to fantasy football. So Rome's going to be in this tier for me. Right underneath Rome, we got Calvin Ridley. I mean, you got back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons out of Calvin Ridley, and he gets Cam Moore coming in there and slinging the rock. So don't hate Calvin Ridley. He showed some stuff last year when his quarterback could actually get him the ball. Khalil Shakir is in this tier for me. He is Josh Allen's number one target by a wide margin. He has now improved tremendously in 3 straight seasons. He got the contract extension this offseason. He's an extremely high floor PPR wide receiver 3. And to be honest with you, I think there's a really good chance he ascends into the next tier or two over the next year or two. How you doing? Next up in this tier, we've got Jordan Addison, Minnesota wide receiver. Incredible last year when healthy. But again, pass volume is completely uncertain. Quarterback situation is completely uncertain. We don't know if J.J. McCarthy is going to be good. We don't know if they're going to ask him to pass the ball a lot. Target competition there with Justin Jefferson, a fully healthy T.J. Hawkinson, does make this a little bit trickier to figure out for Jordan Addison. So he's more of a wide receiver 3, in my opinion. We've got Juwan Jennings and Brandon Ayuk. So we got both San Francisco wide receivers here. You have Debo out of the picture. You have Brandon Ayuk recovering from the ACL. Again, this is like I talked about it with Rashee Rice. I've talked about it with Chris Godwin. Like, Ayuk's an elite separator. He's coming off of a Week 7 ACL. And I don't doubt that he could be useful and will be useful at points in 2025. But betting on a full return to fantasy capability 1 year removed from a midseason ACL is a risky proposition. And even last year, like, he wasn't really producing as a high-level fantasy asset prior to getting hurt. He had like 1 or 2 good weeks. I don't know if y'all remember that. And he skipped the offseason, right? Like, that was a big part of it because he wanted that contract, skipped the offseason, and it showed, really fucking showed on the field with how out of game shape and the lack of production that happened. And guess what? Off the ACL tear, do you think that he's going to come into Week 1 completely ready and conditioned? Unlikely, all right? So Ayuk's down here. Juwan Jennings, listen, he led the team in targets last year. He had 19 more targets than George Kittle did, despite missing 2 games. I wouldn't be surprised whatsoever if Juwan Jennings ended up leading the team in targets in 2025. So I think he's like one of the better wide receiver 3 buys in all of fantasy football. Next up in this tier, we've got Zay Flowers. Now, he's a super fun player, like great player to have in Baltimore. The problem is he lacks any sort of red zone involvement. He's never involved down there, especially when you have Lamar and Derrick Henry and Mark Andrews. Like, why would you? So very little touchdown upside. The other problem is, like, he seems more like a PPR player. You kind of think of Zay, you're like screens, line of scrimmage, slot guy, get the ball in his hands quickly. His 2 seasons so far in the NFL have amounted to 77 and 74 catches. And we're in a day and age where there are so many wide receivers that catch 85, 90 plus passes in a given year. So he's not even really like this high floor or high upside PPR player. So I don't know. Like, I'm having a hard time making a bull case for Zay Flowers outside of just being like an okay wide receiver 3 for you. Next up, we've got the first rookie, Ted McMillan out there in Carolina. He should immediately lead the team in targets here. Wouldn't be surprised if he had 120, 125, 130 targets just out the gate. And I think that type of volume puts you immediately into the wide receiver 2-3 conversation outside of the Wan'Dale Robinson types. Because if you're getting 120, 125 targets, you're almost definitely finishing inside the top 25 wide receivers if your targets aren't all 4 yards away from the line of scrimmage. And looking at how Ted McMillan is as a player, I think we can assume that he's going to get a lot of downfield targets. So Ted, first rookie and only rookie on this list. We've got a couple vets after this. We got Jacoby Myers out there in Las Vegas, an extremely quiet 1,000-yard season last year, despite missing 2 games. I just think extremely impressive season, just given the quarterback situation that he dealt with last year. And now you have a major upgrade with Geno Smith. So I think Jacoby Myers here as your wide receiver 3 is an extremely sexy value pick. And then lastly, we've got George Pickens moving to Dallas. Now, I'm not going to talk about this from more of a football perspective. I think this can go haywire for George Pickens, just, behind the scenes and in the locker room, whatever. But I'm excited to see what he could do opposite CeeDee Lamb. I'm excited to see what he could do in a possibly high-volume passing offense with a quarterback like Dak Prescott. Like, I think he should be a 1,000-yard receiver for the most part. And he's got much higher touchdown upside in Dallas compared to, what presented itself in black and yellow out there in Pittsburgh. So those are the top 36. Those are the tiers. Those are the wide receivers I am looking at drafting and basically how I'm looking at drafting them to build my roster. So again, don't fucking come in here and be like, I can't believe you got Puka ranked higher than Malik Neighbors. That's not what's happening here. The tiers are the tiers. If you want to fucking cry about it, cry some real tears, all right? But while you're looking down and wiping them, hit the button down there that subscribes you to the channel. Over the next 2 weeks, we will be doing this same video for running backs, for tight ends, for quarterbacks. And if you watch all those, I will love you. You know, I will give you a fat smoochie. And the way that you give me a virtual smoochie is by hitting the button that looks like this down below. All right, I'll see you in the running back version of this video.